What's up, YouTube? Today we're going to talk about setting up the Traefik proxy. Now this is a very easy to use proxy. It doesn't require much configuration. And I recently have been diving into this, learning a little bit about it, and it's fairly easy to use. I use it in front of and with my Docker containers, and it gives you all of the configuration to use with your project or your application. So let's begin. I have prepared a configuration and setup file here. This configuration and setup Docker Compose file is going to run a WordPress site with the MySQL database, and then here's the Traefik proxy is going to be in front of that, and it's going to serve the site from our URL. So first things first, we got to set up the Traefik container. We're going to use Docker for this project. So here we're calling in version 2.0. This is important because version 2.0 is different than the previous version 1.7 or 1.4 or whatever. It has a lot of newer, different configurations. So I didn't see a lot of content out there for 2.0, so I went through the documentation and I finally figured out how to work it. So when you're opening up a Traefik proxy container, calling in the image, you're opening the ports that you're going to use. So we're going to use 80 for HTTP, obviously, and HTTPS is 443. And we're opening 8080 because this is where our Traefik dashboard is going to run. I have a Traefik dashboard running right now over here. This is what it looks like. This is really cool that this comes with the service. If you enable it, it's amazing. You can see all your middlewares, your services, your routers, and I'll explain a little bit about those. You can even attach metrics, tracing, and access logs, but I will talk about that in a separate tutorial. This is just the basics on how to get up and running and everything set up. So in this example, we're going to call configuration with commands from within our Docker Compose file. It just seems easier this way. Everything's all in one place. You can do an external file with a .toml extension or even a .yaml file and refer to that. But I'm doing it in here. I find this easier. And you'll find these options in the documentation. When you go to, let's say you're trying to figure something out. Let's see here, routers. There's three options here for static configuration. So you have your file, toml, YAML, and then CLI. These are the options that I'm referring to in the Docker Compose file. We're calling commands in the Docker Compose file. And there's two types of configurations with Traefik. There's a static configuration, which is when you launch the container, when you start it up, that's your configuration, it sticks. You can also have a dynamic configuration where you're putting in the more dynamic information. You can make information changes on the fly, configuration changes on the fly, and it won't even disrupt your container. It will just keep going and apply the new changes to the container. So let's go back to the setup again. So these are not even all of the options that you can set up with this thing. The options are quite vast, but we're going to be setting up the basics. So I'm setting up API settings here. This is for the API. You get an API endpoint if you enable it. And if I wanted to see the API in action, I can visit the site here, this URL, which is also in the configuration file. And I can visit any of these routes to see, what's up with my proxy container configuration. So let's see, I'll go to this right here, paste that in. And this gives me information in the form of JSON from an API. This is telling me what's running, what server it's on, load balancer, stats, all that good stuff. But you have a ton of API information endpoints here for you to access. Now, this is set up API insecure, which is not recommended for production. You're going to want to lock that down and secure that. If you notice above the certain configurations, I'm including URLs to the doc the documentation where you can find that information. I don't want to make this video too long and go into every single detail, but insecure true is just to have it running without any security, just to show you what it does, what it's capable of. And here is where we're enabling that dashboard that you saw. And this is a debug mode, which enables additional endpoints for debugging and profiling. So when I do the debug to true, I'm enabling all of these endpoints with /debug. Okay, moving on. Log settings. I'm not placing them in a file or anything. There is definitely configuration to place them in a file. In this case, I'm just printing them to the console. So if I have my running Traefik container like I do right now, if I were to do docker logs Traefik, this would be my logs here. You can adjust the format, and I'm describing debug level. You have all these options for your levels. You can do error, panic, fatal, warn, or info. Provider settings. This is very important because we're using Docker, so we need to tell it, hey, let's use Docker. So here we are. We're setting enabling Docker as a provider. And down here, exposed by default equals false. This is true by default. It's true, but we don't want to do that in this situation. I want to enable my containers to view traffic and let Traefik use the containers based on tags that I use, because I don't want it to use all of my containers. I don't know if you understand that, but if you don't, you can visit the documentation here. This is the link for the provider configuration. Here I'm referring to our dynamic configuration file. This is in the root of the directory. It's going to be a dynamic YAML file. And this is where we're going to put our middleware. We're going to put a middleware in this project for the redirect to HTTPS. Provider Docker network. So I want all the containers, I want this container and all the containers that are running on network web to be proxied by Traefik. Okay, and then we set up our entry points. These are kind of important because this is where your traffic's coming in, and this is how Traefik is going to know where to send your requests. So we have entry point here, and then if you notice here, it's web. So this is where we're naming the entry point. So the name of this entry point is going to be web. So if I were to go back to the dashboard here, look at my routes. I have some stuff running right now, which is what we'll get to. But the entry point, web. So this is the one that's coming in on 80. This is the one that's coming in on 443, web secured. So let's look at this again. Web secured and web. This is pointing to 80, this is pointing to 443. We're going to use these as a reference in our other container that we want to run on these entry points. So it's important. Certificate settings. This is for Let's Encrypt certificates for your site for HTTPS. I included a link here for these configuration examples. But basically, we are doing TLS ALPN01 to generate and renew Acme certificates with a TLS challenge. So we're telling it to do that here. And then over here, we're setting up our email for those certificates. And then in here, we're referring to the directory and the file that's going to hold our certificate information, which is inside of a Let's Encrypt directory in the root, referring to an acme.json. Now we do our volumes. This is the volume for the Let's Encrypt certs. We're going to attach a Docker host to this container because it needs access. And we're going to put our volume for our dynamic configuration file. And this is also important here. We're going to be running on the web network. Now these labels here, let me tell you something about labels and Traefik. Traefik uses labels to define the behavior and the rules of the Traefik proxy for the container. So this is the Traefik container. So we wouldn't usually put labels on this container, but we are going to use the dashboard, and that dashboard comes from Traefik container. So we're going to have to, if we want to strap on a URL or something to it, we're going to have to show that. So we're going to kind of do Traefik configuration on itself in a sense. So let's enable Traefik on itself. Let's set up the router API rule is going to go to this subdomain. So we're setting the domain for the dashboard here. And then this is setting the service to the internal API service for Traefik. It's basically referring to itself to show the dashboard inside of Traefik. This stuff will usually never change. Obviously, you're going to put your own domain in here, but just getting the gist, the scope of this is just basically setting you up to put a name to your dashboard. You would put other options in here to secure your dashboard, to secure your API. You can refer to the documentation for all those options. Now in this example, we're going to be working with a WordPress container. We're going to launch an instance of WordPress. So here I'm just going to create a regular WordPress container. And if you notice in this configuration, we aren't opening any ports. We're not going to open 80, none of that, because the port is exposed from within the WordPress container by default to port 80. Usually you'd put 80 here to expose it on the host as well. But in this case, Traefik is going to handle all of that. So this isn't a tutorial about WordPress configuration. So we're going to jump straight to the networks and the labels. If you look, we are on the web network. So this is the same network that Traefik is running on, so it can communicate with the other container. But if you also look, we're attached to a backend network, and Traefik is not on this network because we don't want to put the backend network with Traefik. We're not trying to proxy that. We just need the backend network to talk to the database, which is also on the backend network. That's it. Which is another reason why we didn't expose our Docker containers by default. So here in the labels, I'm telling Traefik what to do with this container. So the first thing you got to do is enable Traefik, and then now I'm going to start setting up the roots and the middlewares, and it's pretty straightforward. So you have your HTTP. This is called a router because we are setting. We're creating a router. We're creating something we're telling our domain what to do, where to go. So in this example, this says Nginx Web, I guess from a previous example, but I'm just naming this route right here. And we're setting a rule that the host will be example.com. This would be replaced by your domain, obviously. And this is going to be sent to the entry point web, which is on port 80. So if you notice, I have the same name here, Nginx Web, Nginx Web. This is the rule for this route, the rules. And then here, we're attaching a middleware to this route to redirect our request to 443 to secure. So now we're going to make another route. And this route is going to be called Nginx Secured. You can name it whatever you want. It doesn't matter, as long as it's not named the same as another route. And you're going to put your domain again in here. And then you're going to set the entry point to web secured. And last but not least, you're going to attach your TLS cert resolver right here. My TLS challenge is referring to this right here, the name. That's the name of your TLS cert resolver. Okay, that's done. So now if you were to run this, it would actually run and it would be proxied. It would work. Redirect at file. And this is kind of important. This is pointing to your middleware, and it is in a dynamic configuration file. There's these things called providers. Docker is a provider. You can have a file provider, which is basically where you can put other commands and configurations. So in this case, when we registered our file provider up here, we're telling it to look in dynamic.yaml. So we're going to search for a middleware called redirect in our dynamic.yaml. Now let me switch over to the dynamic.yaml really quick and show you what's in there. This is an easy one. This is our middleware to redirect. And here we have a YAML file, middlewares, the name of the middleware, redirect. We're doing the redirect scheme, and the scheme is going to redirect to HTTPS. And that's it. This is our dynamic configuration file. It's very simple. This is an easy one. Nothing complicated here, but it's needed in order for your site to proxy over to HTTPS. So that's all set. This is ready to go, run on Traefik. Your database container, nothing fancy here. If you notice, it is on the network, the backend network, not on the web network. And does not have any labels because it has nothing to do with Traefik. It just has to do with WordPress. That is it. And then we have our networks here, web, backend. These were both created externally outside of this file, and our 2 volumes for WordPress and database. Now let's show you how to run this bad boy. Okay, so obviously you know you're going to need a VM with an instance of Docker running on it. That's a prerequisite. We understand that this is a proxy container with Traefik for Docker. So I have that. Here's my instance in the cloud. I already made a Docker compose file, and I pasted that configuration in here. Obviously I put my own domain in there. I'm using just some example information, passwords or whatever. And we're going to run this. Let me show you how this works. Now, if everything's correct in here, it should run just fine. But in this case, I'm going to run these one by one to show you, you know, the whole process. So in my directory, I didn't even create this Let's Encrypt file. Actually, once you launch the container, the Traefik container, it will automatically create Let's Encrypt for you with your certificates in it. It will set that whole thing up, so you don't have to worry about any of that configuration. It will automatically build it for you. So let's do a Docker compose up-d on the Traefik, however you say that. Okay, so now that says it's running. So let's do a PS really quick. Check it out. Yep, looks like it's running. And then this is it over here. Boom. Now if you look at my dashboard, here we have the middleware has been registered, the redirect that file, redirect scheme is the type, and the name is redirect. And click on it. Not much information here, just basic stuff. You can look at, these are services. So this is the referring to what it's running. It's running the container. And this is a load balancer, it says, type of service. And the routers, these are the routes. So these are the entry points that it's running on, and this is the service, and the rule is the host, the domain name. Okay, so back to the dashboard. Now if you look at the top here, you're going to see this thing polls. So it refreshes, kind of gives you that real-time-ish kind of update. So watch as we launch the WordPress container. So Docker compose up-d WordPress. Okay, built the DB, built the WordPress. So it looks like everything's running now. WordPress, MySQL, Traefik, good to go. Now if you look over here, we have 3 services running. And they're all successful, 100%, or 3 routers running, 2 services, and our middleware that we have from before. Well, let's explore this. So these are our routers. These are where our entry points are coming in. We have ITB Vault. This is secured. So it's some 443, and this is the one on 80. But we only have 2 services because we are only running 2 containers. So we're running WordPress and we're running the Traefik container. And that's it. I mean, it works. You can literally, I can literally go to the site. This is from a previous example, but you know, it's set up, it's running, it's on HTTPS, it's secured, it's a WordPress site, you know, and that's basically how the basic configuration works for Traefik. The documentation here, as long as you understand the basics and what you're looking for, you can go here, you can find out more about metrics, you can find about tracing. There's some user guides. You can use Kubernetes, Let's Encrypt. This is a pretty brilliant little proxy, and it's very easy to use once you understand it. I hope I did a good job at explaining it to you, the basics, and gave you enough information to get around the proxy. Thank you so much for watching my video. It means a lot to me. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up below if you like this content, and also subscribe to my channel if you want to see some cool new videos. I try to release them as frequent as possible. If you have any questions or concerns, or you don't understand something, feel free to leave a comment, and I'd love to help you out and answer any of your questions. Thank you.